You want to have somebody by your side who's willing to take you by the hand and say, I give you all my network, all my banking, all my inspections, all my turnkey providers, all the relationships I've built in the last 15 years. You don't have to build them anymore. You can just jump in and take advantage. That's really the big difference of having a mentor or not having one.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Practical Wealth Show. So today I am thrilled to welcome back, actually, Dr. Axel Meierhoefer, the former Air Force officer turned real estate investor coach and the founder of the Ideal Wealth Grower. He's not only built a multi-million-dollar portfolio through multifamily and turnkey investing, he's also author of a couple of books. The Shift in Coaching Dynamics was the older book, and the Ideal Wealth Grower, which is his latest book, and he's the host of the Ideal Investor Show. So Axel, welcome to the show.
Hey, Curtis, thank you for having me.
Yes, long time. And which is the inside joke because I was just on his show.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we find ourselves really aligned in how we think about money. And so, I really want to dive into your thoughts and how you help your what do you call them? Your not mentees. It's a better word for that. Your students and your community, right? I want to talk about that. But tell me because this is his second time on the show, and we'll take we will put the previous interview in the show notes. But talk about your journey from the Air Force through real estate investing, and then tell me what triggered the shift and how did your military background, if it did, shape your investing?
Right. So, I mean, the transition was basically first retiring after 22 years from the Air Force, and I got a job because I was offered a job in Santa Barbara for a software company, and I did that not quite for 5 years, and to your question about how does that relate to real estate investing, I started a consulting company, and I don't know, I mean, I keep telling the story, and I can't really say exactly why that wasn't obvious to me at the time. But shortly after starting the company, I'm like, okay, so no more like this whole pampering surrounding environment that the military gives you, and no more 401k, plan or anything like that. If I wanted, this was my thinking, if I really didn't want to necessarily have to work until I die, I would have to do something for retirement. That all of that happened in around 2005, 6, and so forth. And the stock market had not at all recovered from big crash in 2003. I thought, okay, stocks probably not it. What else could I do, and what do successful people do? And that's how I discovered real estate, initially exclusively for myself or for our family, as something that would generate cash flow. And as I mentioned, we were living in Santa Barbara, which is probably one of the really expensive places. I mean, I know there are some more expensive, but it's already up there. Right. So investing directly where we were living was just not really possible. The numbers just didn't work out. So my research and my journey basically was, okay, how can somebody who lives in a pretty expensive area invest where the properties perform? And that's how I discovered turnkey investing, and then just started doing it. As you know, we're both on podcast hosts, so we obviously people who like to talk a lot. So I told all my friends that that's what I'm doing when they ask me. And then oftentimes, like, half a year later or so, they came together and they checked in. Hey, how did this go? Are you still doing this? Did you actually get the property you were looking at, and so forth? And more often than not, I could say, yeah, I have this one, and now I'm going after the next one, and so forth. And over time, people kept saying, hey, this is actually kind of interesting. I know a lot of people who want to invest in real estate, but they're kind of afraid, or they're afraid to make mistakes or whatever. Could you show me how you're doing it? And that's how Ideal Wealth Grower actually started. I started doing the internal investing basically in 2005. And then it took another 10 years
Mm-hmm.
until I have babbled enough about it that people said, okay, this should probably be a business.
Okay. All right. I love that. But see, the business came because you're doing it. So, you can show
Yeah,
somebody what you've done. Um, I have a question. I'm trying to think of one to ask this one. So let me ask it this one. I want to back into turnkey in this market. So you
right.
talk a lot about the freedom, the time freedom point. Can you
Right.
break down for me what that means and how someone can start aiming for it?
Well, it starts out with the fact that everybody lives a different lifestyle, right? I
Mm-hmm.
assume you would agree with that. And what I
Yes.
mean by that is, if I ask you, Curtis, for you to comfortably live, pay for like transportation for your house or apartment, for like going on a vacation, and you may have some hobbies and stuff, how much on average does that actually take in money per month on average?
Right.
Right?
So if I'm
And you might
yeah,
say, yeah, if you like, you can give me your number if you want the public to know.
probably about yeah, no, we'll just make up number. But I would say most people, if I ask them that, they say like 10 grand a month, like $120,000 a year. And
Right, that
depending on where you
depends a
live
lot.
at, like I
Yeah.
don't think where you live at, that's going to cut it. Right. So, but that's a
No, in
good
San
starting
Diego,
point.
it probably would. But see, the point is, it also has to do with where you live, right? And
Yeah.
what kind of
Yeah.
job you have. But let's just say we play with the 10,000 a month as the number, right? I think
Yeah.
that is actually pretty generous, but it's a good number. So now we have that number, and now we have to kind of go calculating backwards to say what kind of forms of passive income do we already have, and what do we need to build so that we get to consistently those $10,000. So let's just say you already had some sort of something where you get a little money, you invested in some stocks and they give you some dividend. And let's just say that's $1,000 out of the $10,000 that you can say that is coming in, or that's pretty securely coming in. Keep in mind that we're not saying tomorrow you stop your job or anything like that. We're
Right.
just saying how do we build the portfolio? So it could even be the total $10,000. You have no passive income. The only income you get is because you work. If you were to stop working, you wouldn't have any income.
Right.
So now we say, okay, well, if we go into the real estate market, we want to find properties, and I like to, let's just for a simple calculation say we want to find properties that starting day one give us $250 a month in positive cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you take that and you say you want $10,000 in income, on first glance, you would need to have how many?
Oh, you want me to do math in the morning? All right. So
Yeah, no, it's not it's another test. So you need 40 properties,
40
40
properties.
properties,
Okay. Uh-huh.
right? Now, that's just on first glance. Can you get 40 properties over time? Yeah, you could. But keep in mind, how does a real estate deal, a residential real estate deal really look like? The reality is, let's say we buy house number one and it actually gives us $250.
Mm-hmm.
In the background, we know we have the mortgage, we have insurance, we have property taxes, then we have property management because we don't want to do this ourselves, and we need some reserves. Now, as we build a portfolio, even if it's not 40 properties, there comes a point where we have a certain amount. I call that the pivot point, where we say, okay, I have $25,000 or $35,000 in my reserves, siphoning off from the different rents. Now I
Right.
don't need to keep doing this, because why would you want to have like $50,000 or $100,000 in reserves? You don't have that many repairs ever, even if you have a huge portfolio. So I always say it's a personal decision, but somewhere between 20 and 30,000 is when you can stop. But basically, why am I saying this? So year one, let's say we get our $250. Now year two, we would obviously, because we need to train our tenants, increase the rent a little bit. So let's just say our cash flow is now $300.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next year we're doing it very modestly, and then it's $325. And then there's a good year again, and we're getting it to, let's say, $375, and then and so forth. So year after year, now this is one property.
Right.
Now, obviously, when we want to build a portfolio where we started, it probably needs to be 40. We buy the second one, we buy the third one, and so forth. What actually happens is to get to the $10,000, and I have actually a little tool that I'm happy to send to you, and you can give it to all your clients. We did a calculation. In our example, we started with $300, but it's not very different. If you start with $300 and you increase the rent per every year by $50, because you're a nice landlord, you're not gouging people or whatever, you will end up needing about 15 properties, right? Because the last one you buy, number 15, starts again with the 300 or the $250, but the other ones are 6 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old, and so forth. So if you were to buy one every year for 15 years, you would have your 15 properties, and the very first one would no longer give you just $250, it would probably give you $1,000. That's
Wow.
also the reason why, even though it initially looks like you need 40, but that property that is now 10 years old and makes you $1,000 in passive income is basically the equivalent of 4 properties.
Wow.
Right? If you think about it that way, each property 250, but if one gave you 1,000, that's the equivalent. That's why you don't really need 40 to make $10,000, but somewhere between 15 and 20. Now you have to also keep in mind, since this is like a 10 to 15-year plan, these are finance properties, right? We're getting a mortgage, we're only putting 20% of our own money in. And if you think a little forward, what happens to the value of money? Because part of the reason that we're increasing the rent is because obviously everything gets a little more expensive. We have inflation, we have a little bit extra cost. But in reality, in my view, and that's what I'm teaching in our mentoring program, is what we're basically covering for is the depreciation of purchasing power.
Right.
Right? The dollar that you have today in 10 years is maybe worth 50 cents or 40 cents or stuff like in purchasing power. How much stuff can you get for the same dollar? Keep in mind, we have a mortgage that doesn't change. It's a 30-year mortgage. So there is a way to say, okay, do I really need to consume this cash flow that I'm making? Because if we say in your question, your original question, just reminding the audience, was, what are we talking about when we're talking about the time freedom point? And the answer is, okay, it's the point in the future where we make these $10,000 in passive income, so we don't need a job anymore.
Right.
But until that point, we probably still have our job. So if we make the assumption that our job covers our expenses, because that's what it does today, then the money that comes in as positive cash flow initially goes to help build us the reserve, and then we can make a decision. I always encourage my mentoring clients to look at all the properties you have, look at which one has the lowest balance in your mortgage, and start pooling that cash flow as an extra principal payment into that mortgage. So instead of having that mortgage for 30 years, you've probably done it in 15 years.
Right.
Now, what does that do? Right, at around 15 years, we're reaching pretty close to our goal, our time freedom point number of $10,000. But now that first property is oftentimes it's the first one that only gave us $250 when we started. That was on the 20% that we own. When the whole mortgage is gone, it will give us way more because we don't have to pay the mortgage anymore.
Right.
Right. So, and this is true now. If you say, okay, here we are 15 years later, I reached my time freedom point, I'm making $10,000 passive income. In the coming years, more and more of these properties that you acquired are going to be paid off with their mortgage. They don't need to have a mortgage payment anymore. So when people say, well, that's fine when we're saying $10,000 now, and it's probably still a good income in 10 or 15 years from now, but what about into the future after that? And the answer is, well, as you go further beyond your time freedom point, more and more of your properties will get out of the mortgage. So that's a big jump each time a mortgage gets paid off. And obviously, rents are going to continue to increase so that the purchasing power that this portfolio is giving you will basically always be available to you.
I love, I love, so I love this on so many levels. let me get my thoughts straight, because I've coached people that come out of like these $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 courses from these real estate gurus. And it takes me 30 minutes to get out of them what you just said. Like they're focused on tactics, but what is your time freedom point? To me, that's where you start. That's where I start with people,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
and and then what I look at it, so I come out of the, my first 15 years, I was like Uncle Dave on steroids. I thought mutual funds were the end all be all. That was the center, S&P was the center of financial universe. But
Right.
what I've laid, over the last 10 years, as we, we do infinite banking, and we put a planning model in front of that called principles-based planning, where our focus is not on what I call the accumulation theory, hoping markets go up, but velocity, right? What I call the velocity method. So where the emphasis is on cash flow, right? And you basically, because if you look at the real estate as the asset class, then here's a strategy. One a year for the next 15 years. It might not even take that long. You might get good and want more, but you can do that with a real estate as opposed to trying to do it in the stock market, where you can do it with leverage. You're building cash flow, you're getting tax breaks, you're getting appreciation, and you can count it. And it's systematic, and everything is, what is Tom Wheelwright says, the tax code is a map, a treasure map. So what does the government want?
Right.
Housing, energy, jobs, and agriculture, right? And so you're helping create safe, clean, affordable housing, so everything is lined up to do it. And so in our process, we principle 5 is and our goal for people, we call it just financial freedom, which is so we say financial freedom is a capacity, it's not an age.
Right. Exactly.
And and then investing is about becoming, not about buying. So I tell people, look, it's not my job to tell you what you need to become. You need to figure out what asset class excites you, and then work with Axel or somebody like that to, okay, hey, I like real estate as an asset class. I like because I want you to tell me about what is turnkey. Some people have never heard of that, and then why that might be a good way to go for busy professionals that don't want to get in and do a lot, like fix a house. And I had a friend of mine say, look, he walked through houses every week, and if I smell cat pee, that smells like money. Like, that doesn't excite me at all. Okay. And because I'm lazy. I don't want to. Listen, I told my wife, you married me for my looks. I'm unhandy, right? So I'm not trying to do any of that. But
Yeah,
Axel,
that's true.
tell them what. Let's describe what a turnkey is, and then you also remind me. I used to hear this saying from the real estate guys, who has a great podcast. They would say, "Live where you want to live, but invest where the dollars make sense." And so you
Right.
seem to embody that. So can you break down what turnkey is, and let's start with that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, as I mentioned when we first started, I said, okay, I was living and working in Santa Barbara, and I ran the numbers of any properties that were available, even outside of town and a little bit into the mountains and stuff, and the numbers just didn't work out. And so for me, and this is like you just said, you can live where you want and invest where you need, or where the dollars and make sense, or the numbers make sense. I wanted to find out what is the possibility for somebody who cannot really be involved very much in flipping and managing and taking calls from tenants and stuff like that.
Right.
And there's a guy named Chris Closure, who actually is the son of the founder of what originally was a company called Memphis Invest. And that company existed in Memphis and really developed, I would say, the gold standard model for turnkey investing. They are now, if anybody wants to look it up, they are now called REI Nation, right? Real Estate Investing Nation, REI Nation.
Okay.
And the reason is that they expanded from Memphis into like Dallas and Houston and Oklahoma City and a whole bunch of other cities. So it didn't make sense to be called Memphis Invest. But the important thing also for the audience, because it's still absolutely valid and easy and doesn't cost you a $5,000 course, is you can go on Amazon and find the book that's titled Turnkey Revolution. And what the book is about, the first half, Chris basically described how his family built this Memphis Invest company and what makes it special. But for anybody listening to us, the second half is basically a whole bunch of checklists or questions you should ask if you consider getting into turnkey investing. Now, for the audience, what is actually turnkey? I say in my description, a really good turnkey company that we would want to work with, and we have a whole bunch of them available to our clients, is a company that has three pillars or three legs of the stool. The first one is they have a team or a contractor under contract that is solely focusing on renovating what I call the ugly duckling in a good neighborhood. I don't know if it's the key property or not, but it's definitely not the one that is the prettiest. And they're renovating it to modern standards, ripping out and making new electric, new plumbing, new bathrooms, new kitchens. But oftentimes these properties originally were like in the 60s, 70s, early 80s, some are even older. They make the property basically fully modern. Everything is basically as if you're getting into a brand new house when they're done. That's kind of like the renovation department, pillar number one. The second department is the marketing and sales department, and it has two features for us, for my clients, and for people like me. We are basically the first go-to person or organization that they offer their finished, renovated properties to. And in 90% plus of the cases, people like myself and our clients or other people like doing same thing take the properties. Every rare so often they actually say, okay, somehow nobody wants it or can't find a client for it, and then they go give it to an agent and they put it on the MLS and stuff like that. But what's important, why I make that a separate pillar, is these guys are sitting in the middle between property management and the renovation team, and they have to hold the line so that the property, when they offer it to me and my clients, is going to appraise to the asking price. And that's very important, obviously, because we want to do this in 80-20 or 75-25% financing. And anybody who has done anything in real estate knows you can only get the financing up to the appraised value. So if they find a property and renovate it and they put it on the market for 190,000, the appraiser comes in and says, I give it 175, you don't get more than 175 base to get your finance. So this middle pillar, marketing and sales, main thing is make sure that your contractor guys don't over renovate the thing so that it doesn't appraise. It's a little bit of a balancing act. And then obviously the support the whole process of the sale itself and working with the title company, blah, blah, blah. And then the third pillar is property management. And anybody listening to us or thinking through it, you will immediately see, why is this so important? Obviously, property management does not like to get a lot of calls from tenants about little stuff that doesn't work. So if a tenant basically moves into a freshly renovated, almost like new house, in the first 3 to 6 to 8 months is basically, if any of the renovated stuff wasn't done really perfectly or as good as possible, that's when it breaks, when you use it the first few times. So this is why it's so important. Now, property management will always push the renovation team to do the renovation so that their statement is, make it so that I don't ever get it, or we don't ever get any calls. Now, what we do on top of it, if you have a turnkey provider that has these three pillars, then you can talk to the guys in marketing and sales. And for our clients, I'm oftentimes in those calls and I say, okay, you guys want to sell this property, and I'm assuming, is it the right assumption that you're proud of this property? You found it, you renovated it, you're putting it in front of me. Yeah, we're proud. Say, okay, well, if you're so proud, you should have no problem to give me a 1-year warranty on anything you touched when you renovated it.
I love that.
Right?
Yes.
They made it, they found it, they renovated it, they did it in conjunction with their property management. Now, guess what? If still something doesn't work in the first year, we don't have any costs. We tenant calls property management looks in the account, sees, okay, 1 year, go fix it, move on, right? So those three pillars are really, really important. And what that leads to is, we mentioned that we want to build our 15 property portfolio, remember? So what I always say is, let's find a region that you're comfortable investing in, and then work with the turnkey provider with the goal to build what I call a cluster, 4, 5, 6 properties with the same organization. Why?
Okay.
Because as long as you're building that cluster, once a month you have a 20 to 40-minute conversation with them, like a Zoom call or something like we're doing right now, to say, tell me what's going on with my properties, any issues with the tenants, when do we need to renew, everything going well, what other properties do you have up and coming in the pipeline? And you have that conversation about a half an hour once a month. And then when you get to your 5th or 6th property, then you might say, okay, where do I want to build the next cluster? And even when you have all 15, like in my case, I have 10 right now, and I'm good. I don't need $10,000 a month because I have military pension and stuff like that. But with my 10, I only have to talk to 3 property managers. So I always say, in a good month, I can get it done in 1 hour. In a bad month, it takes an hour and a half. Right? Because the length of the 3 conversations depends a little bit on what's going on with the properties. But that's it.
And
right?
that's how, once you got it going, that's what it takes to manage your portfolio.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Especially if you say, okay, now in my case, I have my portfolio. I'm not necessarily planning on expanding it, at least not in the way I have it. I'm doing some more diversified investments, like in agriculture, like coffee and cacao, or out of country. But in the Midwest, where most of these Midwest and South, where those properties are, I don't think I need more than my 10 property portfolio. And so, yeah, it's basically these conversations, like I said, and I can manage it very easy. The other thing that we teach our clients is, you are basically the boss of your investing company. Right? I'm encouraging everybody to form an LLC and do all the investing, banking, taxation, and stuff like that through that. And it's not so much because you desperately need an LLC. It's good for a number of things, as a protection and separation of private and business and stuff. But the most important thing is the mindset.
Right.
If I can teach you that you are the king or the queen of your own empire, called, I don't know, the Curtis Empire LLC or something like that.
Right. The May Empire.
That gives you, that gives you a certain mindset where you learn that the bank is kind of like an employee for you. The property manager is kind of like an employee. The insurance company is kind of like an employee. The inspector for the next property you want to buy is kind of like an employee, and so forth and so forth. So when you think of a company, and the normal company has employees, well, the ones that you have are not traditional employees, but they're working for you, not you for them. They want your business. They want your business. And I always say, what do you do if somebody is hired? You pay them 10% of the gross income that you're generating every month, but they don't perform to your liking. What do you do?
Let them go.
Yeah, you fire them. And you get somebody else, like any other company. So that's why I like this analogy to say, yes, there are businesses of, it's kind of like a business to business relationship. But from your perspective, you're paying them, you might as well ask them to perform. And the call that you do every month is basically to check if your employees actually meeting your expectations.
I love that. Like, I think, let me piggyback on that, because I would add another thought. So, because your grower mentoring model, you emphasize accountability, motivation, feedback. What does that look like in practice? And do you find that you have to instill that ownership mentality in people when they come to you?
Yeah, so there is actually a very famous business coaching model called Grow that was developed by a guy named John Whitmore. If anybody wants to look it up, he wrote a book called Performance Coaching, and many companies adopted that. And I looked at it, and I really like the model. I should say this up front. But what I thought was kind of funny, when I looked at it, I'm like, okay, what do I do after the first coaching session, right? Like that was my question. Now here you will understand in a second why. What does it actually mean? It means G stands for goal, and it has two categories: the big, like what we call the big, hairy, audacious goal. I want a 15 or 20 or 30 property portfolio, and I want a nice wife, and I want to just look good, and I want to whatever, all stuff you want. And then the sub goals are, in the next 12 months, I want to buy my first property, or I need to get a new car, whatever the smaller goals are. So that's the G. Then the R stands for what is your current reality? Now, keep in mind that this is a conversation, right? So in the beginning, we establish what are these goals. And if we have time enough in the first session, we say, okay, tell me a little bit, what is your current reality? What are your expenses? What is your living condition? What is your family condition? How happy and satisfied are you? Blah, blah, blah. Then we look at O, and that stands for opportunities and obstacles, right? Like, for example, do you already know where you would ideally like to invest as an opportunity? So that could be our location for the first cluster. Obstacle could be, well, you have been for years working and your employer has always put the money with your approval into a 401k, but you didn't make it a self-directed 401k, right? So that would be an obstacle, but we can fix it by actually approaching your employer and say, I would like to change my 401k into a self-directed 401k. That opens a bunch of, or you might have an obstacle to say, okay, I have a lot of obligations, so there's never any money left, so I don't know how to get the down payment together for any property, right? Those kind of obstacles. So we have the G, R, O, and the W. I know this is always a little bit of a stretch, but that stands for what actions will you take, right? So for example, if we say, well, we could see if our employer allows us to have a self-directed 401k, what's the action you will take? Well, in the next week or two, I will go to them and see if I can switch it and change it, right? Or you can say, well, in the next 2 weeks until we have our next session, I'm going to go and find out, just brainstorming, where in the United States I would ideally want to have my investment properties, or whatever the thing might be. And obviously, again, this is a conversation. So until this point, we're all good. We could part and you go off and you do your thing. Why did I change it to grower? Now we have session number 2, 2 weeks later. What would I ask you? First thing is, hey, Curtis, what was the experience when you talked to your employer? What was the experience when you went online and searched for potential locations where you would like, right? I want to know how did you experience the action that you took? That's the E. Then the next thing I would say, okay, now great, you told me everything, how it was and where it was easy and where it was hard and what your employer said. Now tell me, what were the results? And you might say, okay, the employer said next month we can switch it to self-directed. And the other thing is, I decided Ohio, Tennessee, and Kentucky look good to me. Okay, so then based on the results, the next question is, do these results change anything on either your big, hairy, audacious goal or any of your sub goals? One thing could be to say, well, I found out I want to invest in Ohio, and I looked around and I thought they still have properties for $100,000, and I was shocked that kind of like for something decent, I have to pay somewhere like 160, 180 to 100. Okay, so that probably means that the speed with which you thought you could acquire properties is a little slower than you thought. Does it change the number of properties you want to get? No. Okay. So now we talked about the goals again. Now, and as you can see, now we did the E, the R, and we're back at the G. It becomes a cycle. And so every time we come together, we go through the cycle. What was the experience? What were the results? Did it impact the goals? How did it change your reality? Did we get rid of some obstacles? Did we find new opportunities? How will you take new action going forward? And, so when it was grow, it kind of, for me, it stopped at the moment where you say what you're going to do. And I added the other 2 letters to say we want to make it as a recurring thing for every session.
That's phenomenal. I love structure. right? So the because I think you don't like I'm training like new agents in our our banking system of showing people how to use insurance for a bank. But what I find is most people are work processors. They go to people, you go to work, people tell you what to do, you get a check. And
Yeah.
when you're, which is fine, but when you move into what Dan Sullivan calls the performance economy, it doesn't work that way. You have to be a work creator. And so you kind of, with your coaching, you're teaching them how to be in business, but you're giving them structure. I can see the accountability and the here, do this, and you got to report, I guess, back to somebody to kind of keep you on point over as you
Yeah,
grow
exactly.
your money. Okay.
Well, right. And one thing, Curtis, that actually happens is when I have over like a year is normally the mentoring program is developed for a year, but it doesn't take a year. If you have a conversation in a certain structure over and over and over again, what I have detected, and I'm actually proud if that happens and when that happens, that our clients actually start adopting the same kind of structure for their conversations,
Right.
whether they use it in their job, but also when they're basically talking, let's say they're looking for financing for their next property, right? And they would say, okay, my goal is this. What are the situation? What can you offer me? Is basically the reality, right? What is the current reality for you, Mr. Banker? Right? What can you give me? What can you do special for me, and so forth? Are there any obstacles? What documents do you need from me? So I get the best rate and the best terms and so forth. Are there any opportunities? Is there something if I open a bank with an account with your bank and get a mortgage? Are you going to give me like 0.5% off or something like that, right? And so forth. And so, what will you do for me until we talk again in a week from now so that I know what the offer is, what the proposal is? I will obviously reach out to a bunch of others and then I'm going to pick the best one, right? So
That's
basically,
oh my God.
that's the same kind of conversation. It's
Yeah.
just not so much a behavioral change. It's like you're applying the same model when you're talking to quote unquote your potential employees.
See, it's funny because Kiyosaki says in but the favorite book of the Rich Dad series for me is Rich Dad's Guide to Investing. And he says investing is a plan. It's boring. You find a formula, you keep working. It's not this exciting stuff you see on TV where you see all these financial shows with fancy music and all this drama because they're really gambling, you know. And so,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
they're really gambling. So let me ask you a question. So let's talk about the economics of this model. As we record this, where are we at? June of 2025. Uh, does it matter what the rates are, the current economic higher rates? I remember when I first heard about this, the down payments were lower, the house, the markets in different, you alluded to it earlier that the value of the properties may be up. How do you deal with that? Do you find, like, if you were starting today, is it, let's say I'm starting, let's say we're talking to this and I'm lazy, our business is growing, I just want to save money and say, hey, I want a house a year for the next 10 years. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you help me facilitate that? Is that still a viable thing?
Yes, that's the short answer. The slightly
Okay,
longer
I like
answer is well, the point is, remember where we started. A lot of
Mhm.
people look at location, 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 and then the next thing is what's the price and all that kind of stuff,
Right.
right? What I'm saying and what I said right when we started, Curtis, was I want to see how is the asset performing. And the performance metric is how much cash flow am I going to get day one. So to
Okay.
answer your question, is it still possible? The answer is quickly yes. The only thing I need to do is find a property that, if our goal is $250 or $300 cash flow, I just need to find a property that generates that. Now, obviously, it's not just any house that makes you $300 cash flow. You want all kinds of stuff: nice neighborhood, good jobs, safe neighborhood, low crime rate, all the other criteria, which is what I meant with the checklist in the book that I mentioned earlier. right? It has all those things that you want to check. But fundamentally, our starting point is let me find a property that even when the interest rate is 7% or 7.5% or whatever, makes me $250 or $300 positive cash flow. Now, obviously, when you look at what is the current reality, it is much harder now than when the interest rate is 4%, right? Because obviously the calculation, if the interest rate is almost double, which is an expense in your calculation, doubling, and the rent is not doubling, right? So less of the rent is in your pocket. That's the fundamental thing that we're basically looking at. But generally, to say what I'm really doing is I have a list of criteria for the properties and I want to go out there and find one that gives me $250 or $300 cash flow. That is still true and that has always been true. Now, here's one little twinkle kind of thing on top of that, and that is if you get a property that does all that at 7.5% interest, and sometime in 2, 3, 5, 6 years, interest rates come down, you will have a big jump in cash flow suddenly because you're obviously going to refi, right? And then you have way more cash flow than you have now. So there is a little bit of a positive thing of buying something now and then having the opportunity to refinance it in a few years when interest rates are lower.
I find it reminds me of my dad used to say, listen, stop. I used to go to different meetings and, with originally when I got into financial services, and I would go hear this guy speak, and I would change my business to this or that. And, people jump around, and he used to say, listen, what you're doing is working. You don't need to change everything you do. Just give your efforts time to compound. And, this is like it's not a get rich quick, but to me, 10 years or 15 years out of 40 is kind of quick.
Exactly, Curtis, that's what I say to clients when they're kind of a little skeptical. I'm oftentimes very kind of, this is my German genes coming through, when I'm pretty direct to people. I'm saying, okay, so what is the normal thing? You're going to school until you're about 25, regardless whether you learn a trade or you get a degree. You're 25. Government right now says you can retire at 67, and if you're really 25, it's probably more like 70 or 75 by the time you get there. But in overall, like you just said, it's probably 45 years, 40 to 45 years.
Right.
What I'm saying is, why don't we do this in 10 to 15? Right. And you tell me if I can get you there in about a quarter of the time, or maybe a third of the time. Is that a good deal to you?
I think so. I think so.
If you say, okay, I think I'm a male, I can get to 80 and I can retire instead of 67, I can retire at 45. I think that's a pretty good deal.
That's a pretty good deal. So, Axel, what I want you to tell them how to find you. We're going to talk about this, this dovetail perfectly into our 5 principles, of which are save, right, protect, build a legacy, liquidity, because you need the liquidity. Our clients would use this to collateralizing their insurance policies or whatever for the down payments at least, right? And then your revenue comes back to where you be the bank. But you've got to, I like to, in our system, actually we call them cash flow engines. You want to buy or build assets that send you a check so you can get to your time freedom point, right? So when we talked last time, I was like, wow, this is because, you mentioned a couple of them, right? There's 4 asset classes, right? Business, real estate, paper, private lending is paper, right? Tax liens or paper, what is that thing called? Life settlements or paper, and commodities. Like, so, and you got to tell me who I can talk to about this, but like buying, what is it? Coffee in Panama, right? Or buying cocoa in Belize. Those are agriculture, right? But it's still oriented around cash flow. So you gotta, the goal of my show is to look, these are things that exist. I'm not saying they're good or bad. You've got to do your due diligence and see what you like. That's why I say it's not my job to tell them what to become, but what didn't I ask you? This is the point, is to build up for that. What didn't I, we do that, what didn't I ask you that I should ask you that you want to make sure that you get in, and then tell them what's a good next step for them?
Well, you didn't ask me why people should actually join the program that we have, because all the content that I spoke, and you mentioned the book, and I'm thankful that you mentioned the book, it basically describes in similar way, but obviously more in depth, what we just talked about for the last like 40 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Joining the mentoring program, the main purpose of joining the mentoring program is two things. Number one is working with somebody who has already done what you want to do.
Right.
And number two is, while I did those things to get to my portfolio, I wasn't the genius that avoided every mistake or stuff. Just the opposite. I made a whole bunch of mistakes. And that is actually in my definition of mentoring. If I go and or somebody says, how do you define mentoring? I define it as connecting with somebody who has already reached a certain level of expertise, or some people say wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
by doing the things that you want to do. And the result is that you can do these things while avoiding the mistakes and doing them faster than your mentor. That's also why mentorship is not a thing for the rest of your life. You can work with a certain mentor until you have basically absorbed and accumulated the skills that the mentor can transfer to you.
Right.
And then you probably want to do something else with somebody else who did the thing that you did want to do next. Right. So that's why I limited our program to a year. I'm not saying you're all done with knowing what you need to know about real estate investing in a year, but you will be experienced enough. We will have worked through it. You will have the right mindset that you could go on your own. And if you then decide, and now I want to add multifamily or stuff like that, then you would actually go to somebody who specializes in that. Right. So that's for me the important thing. You could have asked me, I think we covered it now. So that's the point, right? A lot of people are out there and saying, I would like to do real estate, but I'm afraid to make mistakes. And that's exactly what mentorship helps to avoid.
So that's what I wanted you to say. What's the best way for them to reach out to you, stay in touch with you? Because I think this is a real fit for our community. So I want them to follow you and tell them where you want them to go.
Well, basically, the easiest is you can go to idealwealthgrower.com, and there's a button to book a call. And I always feel like it's first that we get to know each other a little bit. We see if we click the right way and like each other, and then we decide, do you want to join the program or not? And if you don't want to go quite that direction right away, if you just put Ideal Wealth Grower in the Google search engine, it's going to give you like pages and pages and pages of newsletter and articles and Facebook and Twitter and all these social media places. But ultimately, I want to really say this, and I want to thank you, Curtis, for giving me the opportunity, is ultimately, this is a matter of human connection. You want to have somebody by your side who's willing to take you by the hand and say, I give you all my network, all my banking, all my inspections, all my turnkey providers, all the relationships I've built in the last 15 years. You don't have to build them anymore. You can just jump in and take advantage. That's really the big difference of having a mentor or not having one.
There you go, guys. So reach out. We're going to put Axel's information in the show notes. Follow up. See, you have to do some work. You have to learn. You have to research. You got to make sure. You need to save money because Kiyosaki used to say, "Well, I want to buy real estate with nothing down." Well, do you work? The first thing you have to figure out is why you don't have any money, right? And because it's going to take some capital, but with real estate, if you want $100,000 worth of real estate, you don't need $100,000. You may need 20, but if you want $100,000 worth of stock, you need $100,000. There's no leverage with that, right? And so no cash flow, just risk. And I'm not saying not do that, but look at the asset classes, figure out what you like, and then I think I've just presented to you a good mentor in the real estate, or especially the turnkey real estate space, that will help you sort out your goals and develop a game plan, business.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm totally with you, Curtis. Thank you for that. And we talked a little bit about it in the show. I would love for anybody listening or watching in the audience, ask yourself, what action will you take now that you heard us talk about?
Yeah. Take action. All right, guys, listen, this has been a great episode. This is what I call, he gave you a lot of rider downers also. So you need to listen to this more than once. Share it with somebody, that needs to hear this. Reach out to me, reach out to Axel, and we may be doing some stuff together. And I'm excited. So go out there. Y'all have a prosperous rest of your day, and share this. Leave us a review if you like it, and we will talk to you soon.